Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 5, Episode 25. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion. But we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. WMD 2.0. How can you and I, as everyday American citizens, go about our daily lives if Iran has a nuclear weapon? No matter that we've been hearing for the last 30 years, that Iran is on the brink of having a nuclear weapon. Today, Iran is on the brink of having a nuclear weapon. And although it may not serve your interests or my interests, dear listener, there are many individual interests in this country that are well served by having a number of failed states around the Middle East and North Africa. Thank you all to my loyal listeners. I do appreciate you. If you're new to the podcast, please like, subscribe, thumbs up, 5-star, write a review, send to friends and enemies far and wide. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. Please consider supporting.
Act 1. It's a lie we always want to believe. Iran is the new target for regime change.
I did a segment a couple of years ago about how we are never lied to. We've never been lied to in our entire lives. We go out and we look for something, and we really don't give a damn whether or not it's true. We want things to be true, and then we find those things out in the world, and when it blows up in our face, we turn around and we say, oh, I was lied to. I was deceived. 70 years ago, the government approached the American people and said that the North Vietnamese had attacked a U.S. naval ship by way of a torpedo attack. The U.S. already had thousands of troops in Vietnam, quote-unquote advisors, a bullshit term that everyone in this country wanted to believe. U.S. servicemen weren't fighting in a hot war. They were just advisors to another nation. And this provocation from the North Vietnamese warranted our troops going over there and fighting in a hot war. And not only advising the South Vietnamese army, but shooting along with the South Vietnamese army at the North Vietnamese, or the Viet Cong, the guerrillas that were in South Vietnam. The Vietnam War in 1965, 66, 67 had enormous U.S. support. Even into 1968, 1969, and 1970, yes, there were major protests against the war. But if you go back and you look at the numbers, it was basically 50-50 in this country. That's what tore this country apart, is that there were still half of the American people that thought that the war was legitimate, the war causes were legitimate, and that the United States was a righteous actor. Go out and try to find anyone who's going to support our intervention in Vietnam from 1955 to 1975 in the 21st century. Roughly 25 years later, the Bush administration spent close to a year convincing us that Saddam Hussein was developing a nuclear weapon. And I'm not using the WMD moniker because that's an asshole's moniker. And I am not an asshole. And I don't want you, dear listener, to ever say it again. It was a term of art that was used as propaganda so that it would be a catch-all. Well, maybe it's not a nuclear weapon, but it's something. He's developing some kind of chemical weapon that's even more lethal than anything that we've ever developed. Saddam Hussein is developing weapons of mass destruction. But what specifically was that weapon of mass destruction? It was a nuclear weapon, kids. It was a nuclear weapon. You remember all that yellow cake bullshit? Enriched uranium? Those rods that were coming out of North Africa? It turns out it was complete and total bullshit. And it was simply a pretext for us to remove Saddam Hussein from power. Not even a decade later, we don't like how cozy the regime in Ukraine is with Vladimir Putin and Russia. We oust those motherfuckers. And we were so pleased with ourselves, we looked to North Africa again, and here's Gaddafi running his mouth. We oust that motherfucker. Ukraine, it was democracy. Well, we're supporting a democratic government. And in Libya, Gaddafi was a murderer. He killed his own people. We're doing the humanitarian thing by removing him from power. Hell, under Barry's watch, with Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, we had a hard-on for regime change. Let's get Assad too. Let's bounce him from Syria. Assad is a butcher as well. He uses chemical weapons on his own people. What a lot of you may have missed, and is now surfacing on YouTube, is how many videos there were of neocons starting in the mid-1990s, and every couple of years reintroducing this into the news cycle. Iran is close to a nuclear weapon. Iran is close to a nuclear weapon. Iran is close to a nuclear weapon.
Say it enough times and it becomes true.
Go back and look at the dates of the videos, dear listener. You think this mantra is new? This is a 30-year-old mantra. If you want to believe some bullshit so the United States can go drop bombs on somebody else, so be it. So be it. But this isn't 2003, and it's not Iraq. We have social media now, and people are too stupid to keep their opinions close to the vest. They are going to advertise as much contemporaneous to these events. And you've got people out there now on social media that are banging the drum for war. Let's go into Iran. Let's bomb the shit out of them. We'll disable their nuclear capabilities, which of course is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life, that you think that you're going to disarm a nation, that you're going to prohibit them from developing a nuclear weapon by simply dropping bombs out of the sky onto the ground. There's only one way that you're going to be sure to disarm Iran of any aspirations of nuclear proliferation, whether that be for civil purposes or whether it be for military purposes. That's fucking boots on the ground. And that's why Israel needs the United States to get involved. Israel cannot go and effectuate that kind of change. The United States can. Iran is not close to developing a nuclear weapon. And to the extent that there are elements in that regime that want to develop a militarized nuclear weapon, we're giving them all the support they could ever want. Because when your regime is under threat, as North Korea has demonstrated and damn well knows, the only way that you're going to prevent regime change is to have a nuclear weapon. So we're actually pushing them towards proliferation, given our current posture. Do not be fooled, dear listener. This is not about Iran having a nuclear weapon. It's about regime change. I preface this next statement accordingly. I truly, at this point in my life, don't give a fuck who you vote for, what political party you align with. It doesn't matter. Good old Georgie got convinced that we could have regime change in both Afghanistan and in Iraq. How did that work out? Well, here comes Barry. Hope and change. Ukraine, Libya, Syria. Ask anyone in Southern Europe, hell, Northern Europe, how that worked out, with millions, literally millions of people fleeing that war, all of that turmoil, and flooding into areas of the Middle East and Europe. Trump, to his credit, in his first administration, didn't really have a lot of regime change, but he did not have the wherewithal or the know-how to prevent this disgusting civil war in Syria. He got convinced of the same nonsense that they've been talking for the last 50 years. Let's just pick the good side. We'll pick the good side of this conflict. You know what picking the good side of the conflict led to? ISIS. Joe was vice president when we ousted the administration in Ukraine that was so close to Russia. And he's a great example of how these things materialize over the course of years, not months, not a year, years plural. He gets us out of Afghanistan, applaud if you're so inclined, but the place is now a dysfunctional wreck. Biden was convinced of the let's pick the best side in the Syria civil war, and for political reasons, he was married to the government in Ukraine, and he refused to have any kind of settlement talks progress after Russia invaded. Do you see the pattern here, dear listener? It doesn't matter which administration. It doesn't matter which political party. You've got these neocons who are convincing these administrations to engage in regime change, and then they don't know how to manage those broken eggs. They can't put Humpty Dumpty back together after they've done it. And they are leaving these messes to other administrations, and they're following the same broken thinking that led us into these problems. I'm not sympathetic to Saddam Hussein. I'm not sympathetic to Gaddafi. I'm not sympathetic to any of these dictators. But if you don't have a plan on how you're going to keep law and order intact after you oust a fucking dictator, your solution is more of a problem than the problem. These polls that have been conducted by the national media demonstrate this war bias. You see these polls where they're asking people, do you want Iran to have a nuclear weapon? You need to have a poll that asks the question, how far away do you believe Iran is from developing a nuclear weapon? It's easy to answer in the negative and have this condemnation. No, Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. They're nowhere fucking close to developing one. What's the point of asking that question? A better question to ask is, how close is Iran to developing a nuclear weapon? And are you willing, as an American citizen, to see U.S. troops put on the ground in Iran in order to effectuate disarmament? How many Americans do you think support the U.S. military having troops on the ground in Iran to make sure Iran doesn't develop a nuclear weapon? How many times are we going to believe this lie? Why do we buy into it? It's all bullshit. It's literally the same playbook they ran on us for Iraq, but this time they're not even going through the trouble of lying to us over the course of months and years with falsified data, falsified analytics, falsified intelligence. They're literally just saying, trust us. In the precursor to another war of regime change, trust us. Are you buying, dear listener? How badly do you want to believe that lie?
Act 2. Do failed states serve U.S. interests?
Iraq is weak, and it's basically an Iranian proxy now. It has so many different influences affecting it from Iran. Fun fact, while Saddam Hussein was in control of Iraq, Shia Muslims actually predominated the country. So he was in control of a faction of Sunni Muslims that were the minority in that country. And you had that in a number of different countries around the region. Syria is a shit show. As much as the media has led us to believe that there's now a quote-unquote government in Syria, it's still a bunch of factions fighting for different regions. There may be a recognized government, but that recognized government does not control all of the areas, the territory inside the borders of Syria. You can buy slaves in Libya. That's how well it's going there. You can buy slaves in the 21st century. Lebanon is completely unstable. Does it really serve U.S. interests for all of these failed states to exist? The question I keep seeing, whether proposed rhetorically on some cable news network or in some clip I see on social media or in these polls, are you safe if Iran has a nuclear weapon? Why don't we flip that question? Are you safer, dear listener, with all of these failed states around the Middle East and North Africa? Does it serve U.S. interests for these failed states to exist and for you to have all of these sectarian conflicts in this civil war? To the extent that it does serve U.S. interests, it's not the citizens of the U.S., it's interests within the U.S. Oil, natural gas, rare earth minerals. The West didn't have access to these things while these dictators were in power. And although it can be difficult dealing with all of these different factions in different regions of these countries, it's easier to go in and bribe some warlord to have access to rare earth minerals or to oil or natural gas than it is to try to extract as much from a dictator that is part of a religious sect or cult that is dead set committed to your destruction. I don't think any of the military contractors in not only the United States but in the West in general are crying over the fact that you have all of these failed states that are clamoring for weapons so that they can continue their territorial wars to try to take over the country. But there is yet one other actor that is truly benefiting from all of this instability, and that's Israel. Israel loves the fact that a number of these nations that were its mortal enemy are now failed states. I can't remember the guy's name. The one in Syria that was part of Al-Qaeda that's now quote-unquote reformed to the extent that you believe that, rolls in, throws out the Assad regime, and now is the, I guess, de facto leader of the government in Syria. Well, one of the stories that I read was the fact that Israel has come in and basically occupied southern Syria. And there isn't anything really this guy can do about it or the government can do about it because they're not in a position to push back against Israel because they're still fighting internal territorial battles with other groups that have not conceded that this guy is the new leader. Gaddafi was a mortal enemy of Israel, didn't think the state should exist, and did a number of things over the course of his 50 to 60 year reign of terror to compromise Israel's place in the Middle East. Saddam and the Ayatollahs were threats to Israel, but thankfully they were easy to turn against one another, and they ended up fighting each other throughout the course of the 80s and the early 90s instead of directing their ire towards Israel. The reason you've seen Benjamin Netanyahu way back in the late 90s and the early aughts coming out against Iraq, Iran, Libya, Syria, he's not wrong that every one of those countries was populated by a bunch of nut jobs and dictators. But you don't have to go out and read a bunch of history books. The evidence is right before you, and it's only about 30 years old. Removing these people hasn't been a boon to safety and security around the globe. I said it in the last segment, I'll reiterate it now. If there is some plan, some programmatic process whereby we're going to remove dictator X and we're going to install democracy Y, bureaucracy Z, we're going to prevent this vacuum of power from existing so that there won't be an internal forever war in a failed state. Okay, I'm skeptical, but let's give it a try. The dildos we have in power now, they don't have a plan. In fact, they're going to do the exact opposite of what one would do if you wanted to create an environment of stability. And it happened in Iraq. I still remember this guy's name because he's so fucking stupid. Paul Wolfowitz. He goes in, he's basically the administrator over the Iraqi government after the displacement of Saddam. And he basically says, anyone who was in Saddam's party, the Ba'athist party, you're fired. And that was practically everyone in civil service, the bureaucracy of the country. All of the civil service, these were all Ba'athists because in order to secure one's position, you had to suck up to Saddam. And in order to suck up to Saddam, you had to start by being a member of that party. Let's say the Ayatollahs are thrown out in a month, in 6 weeks, in 2 months. What do you think the U.S. and Israel are going to do to all of the people who had aligned themselves with the Ayatollahs? When the U.S. basically became the governor of part of Germany, when the U.S. became the de facto political power in the Empire of Japan after World War II, many of the people who were affiliated with these regimes that we'd been fighting for the last 4 years, they kept their jobs. They stayed in their positions, or they were even promoted. And there was some backlash in the United States about it. And George Patton, whose title was like governor or something like that, he was given a region of Germany to rebuild after the war and make sure that there weren't all of these revolts by the people. And basically, he kept all the Nazis in their positions of power. And when he was challenged about it, he said, they're the ones who know how to do things. They know where the water needs to go. They know where the trash needs to go. We can't just displace them and expect that these services that people rely on for their everyday lives are going to continue. What did we do in Iraq? We kicked out everyone who knew how to do anything, and all they did was turn around and reorganize into this different organization that formed a proxy government in that region. It was called ISIS. Oh, and what happened to civil society in Iraq? That's right, it completely broke down, and you had people that would otherwise be going to work or trying to live their lives joining these militant groups to try to throw out the Americans. Do you remember that, dear listener? It's not very well publicized in our national media because it was orchestrated by the United States. But all the Baathists that were fired from their jobs, they eventually reorganized, many of them being recruited into this new organization, and they formed their own caliphate in the middle of Iraq and Syria and ended up taking over swaths of territory and creating this whole shit show that precipitated troops not only from the United States, but from a number of other governments hitting the ground to deal with them. It may serve the interests of some select principles within the military, within government contracting, foreign governments to have these failed states, but it certainly doesn't serve the interests of any of the U.S. citizens. And let's look at where Iran sits. I mean, you start a civil war in Iran by removing the Ayatollahs. Where are all these people going to go? Where are all these migrants going to go? We saw it happen in Syria. We saw it happen in Libya. We saw it happen in Ukraine. They're going to flood in to Russia and Pakistan. And that may actually serve different neocon elements within the U.S. government. That may actually serve different political interests. Regionally, Iran is the last domino to fall. All of the other players in the area are willing to sign on to the Abraham Accords and work with Israel instead of against it. Open your eyes, dear listener. A failed state may not be in your best interest or my best interest, but it may actually be in the best interests of certain elements of the U.S. government and particularly the Israeli government. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.